society organizations, various citizens at community level participate in the devolution process to ensure that their views, their voices are strengthened, and also their community needs are addressed in the devolution agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one comment. I think first and foremost, let me thank the organizations which brought us here. As civil society, I think our role is to actually, because we have constituencies, our role is to actually contextualize devolution as it is. We have been working around the issues to do with devolution with our respected constituencies. But I think with this added information, we will actually go back again and actually we are ambassadors here to go and exchange, we share with our constituencies so that they are well informed. What are the benefits? Which are the challenges? What are we supposed to do as citizens? And which are the low-hanging fruits which we have in our communities? So I think it's incumbent upon us as civil society to make sure that we disseminate the information which we get from these discourses. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, for this opportunity. I just have I don't know whether to call it a comment or a small question. I think from most of the presentations that we have heard thus far, there is a common thread that there seems to be this fear amongst governments, especially our government, to devolve power to the local communities. And this fear is somehow anchored on this thinking that certain groups harboring thoughts of secession or some kind of a federal system of government. And seeing that our last presenter was presenting on cases of devolution within the African continent, what is it that we can learn from other countries that have maybe successful models of devolution within the African continent? What is it that we can learn from them? How have they allayed those fears? Because in terms of socio-political organization, most African countries exhibit the same models, as it were. We are largely circled maybe on regional or tribal lines. If you are in Matabeleland, we know is predominantly people from this area. And the question is, how then can we learn, or what can we learn from these other countries that have successfully implemented devolution in terms of allaying that fear that when you devolve, you are actually creating fiefdoms, or you're actually creating some secessionist tendencies, as it were.
Okay, thank you. I have two issues. I think what is coming out from a number of presentations that have been made is that we have got a gap as a country in terms of those in offices who are supposed to do certain things and they don't do them and nothing happens to them. We have been talking about devolution, which should have been implemented 10 years down the line from 2013 to where we are. It has not happened, but no one has been held into account, and we are moving into the future that way. So I think it's a gap that needs to be addressed. That's number one. The second one is on the capacity. There is the issue of whether there is capacity in the local authorities to actually, run with this implementation of devolution. My view is that there is more than enough capacity in Zimbabwe. We see this when our citizens go into the diaspora. Suddenly you hear, they've made news, headlines, wherever they are. Which headlines they couldn't make at home? What is the reason? Dr. Moyo spoke earlier on about how well the Bulawayo City Council has been run at independence. The deployment of the best brains that we have, that has been thrown out of the window. Look at the people that are running the local authorities. How have they landed in those positions? It's not on merit. It's a number of things. I think we all know them. I'm not going to enumerate each and every one of them. But meritocracy no longer is the main issue in terms of getting people with capacity to run our local authorities. But otherwise, if we were to bring back meritocracy, there is more than enough capacity. If Dr. Nkala is the best person to run a local authority, let him do it, and we'll see a change. But Dr. Nkala will be scrutinized. He'll be vetted, and if he doesn't qualify in this and he fails the vetting, whoever qualifies through whatever criteria, then will find themselves there, but without capacity to actually deliver. Those are my points.
Okay. Our task here as attendees in this seminar is not to go out there to the masses and try to teach them the technical term what devolution is all about. People know their problems, know what they want. It's just like going to somebody and say, hey, what is the menu? They wouldn't know what the menu, they want food. So what happens here, we need to understand that people know they know they have to participate, they need to have power in their local communities, they need to be employed, they need to have resources, they need their roles to be developed. So we may find ourselves having a problem saying, how will they understand devolution? So that's not our burden, really. I will have many more things to say in the afternoon anyway. I don't want to say anything much now. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. One could also argue that maybe it could be a cultural issue where we try to zero it down, literally bring it down to household level. Within our families, are we able to devolve as well, to shape power? Maybe that's another topic that can be addressed as we go further.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. So one of the facilitators or the presenters talked about the issue of saying that we cannot fully have accurate or efficient devolution when it's not financed, when the funds are not there. And currently, when we look at the framework in Zimbabwe, the 5% that's coming, it's coming out of the national budget, and it's being, my understanding is that it's then being given to different local authorities and urban city councils. But then my question would be to the presenters and the people that facilitated before to say, is the 5% really enough? To say that, take for instance in a place like Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls is a tourist destination. They get a lot of foreign currency, and then we then put them in the same bracket with, say, I can't give an example because some people might be from some of the places that I wanted to mention, but then we then put it in the same bracket in a place whereby maybe the economic output of that place isn't to par with Victoria Falls in the same 5%. Isn't then it fair in terms of public finance to then say that the same thing that we do with ward retentions, every ward gets a certain percentage of the outputs that is given. Take for instance, if you live in Bopoma, Ward 9, and then you guys pay your rates on time, the amount of the rates that you pay, I think it's 3%, you get that 3%, and then it comes back to your ward level. I think that in a case like that, it encourages more and more of citizens to want to participate in devolution, and even the provinces themselves to start to want to do well, because they know that the more they do well, it then comes back to them as a province or as a region. That way, I think it works. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll take one more contribution before we move over to the next presenter, who is Mr. Precious Shumba, as he prepares to come.
Okay, maybe back to the earlier issue. One would be interested, maybe, as the program goes on, to really get a person who can tear it down to the understanding of the participants here. Who constitutes your local devolution committee in any particular setup? Because that, in a certain way, helps citizens understand who they are supposed to talk to when they are demanding answers on issues that relate to the devolution issue, the deliverance or lack of with regards to achieving their intended plans in as far as development is concerned. And also, in terms of the legal framework, how do we attain a situation like the one in those that normally drive to South Africa, where if you go into a particular jurisdiction, there's an institution that collects revenues there and then remit the percentage to government instead of government holding the account, the monies in its account and then disbursing it to local authorities. How do we attain that kind of situation in our current dispensation in Zimbabwe? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right now, I just want to call upon our next presenter, Mr. Precious Shumba.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you all. I heard someone saying it's unfashionable to say, let's do prayer. I greet you all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. So I am presenting on the issues that are particularly of concern to residents. It's teething problems that have affected devolution implementation. You see, from May 2013, when this thing was accepted, and when it became law in August, it is something that by now we should be actually doing evaluations of what has happened since then. It's now a decade, and I'm sure that we could be talking about this kind of evaluation. So I will first highlight key expectations from residents on devolution of powers. Then I will briefly touch on what has been touched by fellow presenters. Then highlight as well some of the key provisions that have become problematic to most ratepayers when we talk about devolution. And it is also in respect of public finance management. There are some government efforts, and I will attempt to critique one or two of the interventions by the government in that respect to ensure that we get the proper context of what is it that they are giving with the right hand and taking with the left hand, and ultimately we have nothing on paper to say this is the law on devolution. I will then highlight the current challenges that have been experienced. Then we will end by making some recommendations and conclude. The devolution by its very nature, it's highly contested. Scholars, development practitioners, and even the citizens have a different understanding of what to expect out of a devolved governance structure. This includes the expectation. I come from Manicaland. We have diamonds, but our roads are really very, very bad. We see the planes coming. We see the big vehicles driving through. They take what belongs to us and they take them elsewhere. And to a person of Ndau, Maungwe, the Manyikas, they would be saying devolution must bring these things to us. So it means a lot of things, but I will mainly highlight that the kind of structure that we currently have emanates from the architecture that was established at colonization. The colonial authority established a kind of highly centralized structure where decision-making emanated from the center down to the district commissioners, who would be monitoring at every village, giving instructions, monitoring how they relate with the state. They actually determined the behavior. So the behaviorist in psychology will tell you that people have now familiarized themselves with the kind of expected behavior. So the expected behavior under the current context is that you obey or you are bashed. You are excluded. You are denigrated. We can actually convene a press statement just to highlight how bad you are for the interest, in the national interest. We can highlight that and show that you are a danger to society and to yourself. So, a lot of residents in our conversation believe that the government has abandoned the plans to enact devolution-focused legislation in preference to a deconcentrated structure. A deconcentrated structure means that we are having the national government, even at the ward or district level, conveying what the government intends to communicate. When they talk of Tokwe Mukosi, they don't want the rural district council to be articulating the plans of the people regarding their asset within their community. Instead, the plans are done at cabinet and brought to the people. And the people have to ululate, they have to celebrate the benevolence of the state. And the government must be seen to be the one giving services to the people. But in a devolved state that we imagine, the residents believe that they go back to the Dare, where we used the concept of Ubuntu to deal with our issues at that localized level, where we are able to allow for deliberative democratic processes, where we allow for this conversation between the leaders and the people they lead, so that there is no gap between the governed and the governors. I think that the historical background was very critical, and I want to acknowledge the important contribution raised by Dr. Moyo earlier about how the ZIPRA command constituted the Bulawayo City Council since they had one here. Meritocracy is part of what the Chinese in their implementation of scientific socialism, they have thrived because they believe that you don't put a dunderhead to lead you. You can only put a more competent person to articulate your thoughts and ideas so that when we implement, we evaluate that. And I believe that we expected that there must be guaranteed citizen participation and involvement in the governance of the local authorities, including in national government programs. Currently, this expectation is being eroded daily. You attend a budget formulation meeting, instead of you highlighting your priorities and your needs, your challenges, your experiences, your recommendations, you are getting officials, even at the local level, unable to stomach your inputs. They are not even appreciating that you have a voice, you want to express yourself. In the public sphere, the assumption is that we are all equal and our voices mean the same. They carry the same weight. But the force of the powerful argument must prevail after deliberations. It means that we have been able to have our ideas interact and be interrogated until the best idea emerges. That is citizen involvement. That is citizen participation, not tokenist approaches where you come, you are given information, you go back and say the leader was here. What did you say? What did you tell them? No, they brought good plans. They wanted to do this and that, and everyone was very happy. But are they aware that the clinic does not have drugs? That the nurses do not have equipment? Did you manage to raise that? You would always say they already covered that. He mentioned everything. So the residents expect real involvement, not tokenist approaches. So the differences that were there before independence, that were pronounced a decade after independence, these differences are being entrenched daily. If you listen to the public pronouncements, you actually begin to get a generic sense that people are positioning themselves to defend what they believe in and never to listen to new thoughts, to new ideas, and that there is a contestation of what really constitutes devolution. The Constitution provides for devolution, but what is our general understanding or appreciation of what we really want to happen in the context of devolved governance? So we want also clarity on timelines for the enactment of relevant pieces of legislation. More worrying is the absence of this clarity on the nature of devolution, not from the citizens, but from those with the electoral mandate. When people elect one into office and the majority forms the government, the majority is expected to cater for even the interests of the minority, to ensure that when we are advancing, we advance on the basis that the majority have established the ground rules, but the voice of the minority matters in the final product. And there is no clarity. I will demonstrate to you shortly why there is no clarity. the priorities are different at various levels. So we expect a resources allocation system that follows a clear scientific formula that enhances the equitable distribution of resources in the country. Dr. Chakunda highlighted a formula that he put there. You see, when you bring these statistical equations, I recall the suffering that we had to go through in order to appreciate them. But they give you objective results because you can't rig mathematics. You can't rig a system that is scientific. And that scientific system creates equity, creates hope in something that is predictable. That is why you find in other jurisdictions, a loser does not give up. They come the next time. They have this belief that the ground is equal, that if I contest this time, I have corrected the mistakes of the past, and now I would get the people's vote and get more votes so that I become the member of parliament, the councillor, or the president. But in rigid autocratic jurisdictions, as in ours, where we pretend that we are a democracy, the democracy must not be talked about, but must be felt wherever you go. I have always challenged the colleagues that when we don't have this kind of leverage, until I see some people walking down Mbare streets, putting on their opposition regalia without any harm, they come back and go home, then I would celebrate that now we are a full democracy. That's the basis of my conclusion, that we pretend, and that pretension continues up to now. So the factors that drove the devolution agenda, tirikuti masimba kuwan, the people have the final say, they have the final authority on determining how their resources are managed, how they deploy their human capital, how they even govern themselves. Because we cannot talk of devolution when the decisions are being made elsewhere. When I was a boy and I wanted to get my first passport, I had to travel from Rusape to Mutare. Why not get the passport in Rusape? Why should I go there? When I wanted a birth certificate that is printed and not handwritten, I had to come to Harare. That's most unfortunate, because we cannot continue to trouble the people in that manner. So there is over-centralization and personalization of governmental powers. This can be seen in the literature that has been done. I am happy that I also extracted some material from a paper that was done by Dr. Gordon Moyo, Cornelia Ngue, and another Moyo some time back. Inequitable development leading to extreme poverty in some parts of the country. Unequal resources distribution characterizing the socio-economic challenges. Tribal politics leading to exclusionary politics. I recall that one of the forces, that's why you would find Manikaland, Blawayo, Mat North, Mat South, and Midlands were aggressively campaigning for a devolved governance structure, because everyone felt that we had been excluded in the processes. Everything was happening in Harare, in Marsh Central, Marsh East, and Marsh West. Everything was happening there, and everyone else was just crying. So everyone expected that if we could have a devolved structure where we can sit and plan as the Manikas, as the people in Mat North, in Mat South, we can actually come up with something that is more legitimate, more acceptable, and more relevant to our context, rather than for someone to come and bring it to us. And that is one of the issues. So you would find that in some strategic positions, you don't see a Manyika. They will not be there. You actually know. Now you will see, and you know that if you are not of the Shumba Murambri, or if you are not Kalanga, you don't get the strategic position because Ahuziwe Dewayo. This kind of politics is what drove the devolution agenda. Everyone felt that we are being marginalized, we are being excluded. So the other factor, there was a reluctance of national institutions to relinquish power. Diana Conia's 2003 highlighted this point because she also did a study covering Binga, where she was focused on what was happening there, and she did a good ethnographic piece from that end. Decentralized functions without providing adequate financial resources to sustain the government's decentralization efforts. You see, what was triggering this force was government would say, we have created this structure. That's now what you manage. But they are not giving you the financial resources to run with the agenda. So they have given you a paper mandate, but they have taken the financial resources. How then do you succeed? And that is the major, one of the major drivers that pushed this aspect. So I am not going to talk much about these forms of decentralization. Decentralization is the overarching concept of the transfer of power to lower tiers of a government. When we are talking of decentralization, we can actually identify it by the kind of functions that an office that has been given the powers is performing. Is it performing a fiscal function? Is it an administrative? Is it a political? But when we are talking of these forms, we are talking of a deconcentrated structure, which is what the government of Zimbabwe prefers. They prefer a deconcentrated structure where all decisions are made on Tuesdays in cabinet, and the minister reads a press statement, and all government departments up to the village are implementing and echoing that. The role of the local authorities is minimized or relegated to a recipient. The local authorities are expected to be passive recipients of information coming from the center. And that is one of the threats to our current thrust to have a devolved governance structure. So, delegation, we are talking of the powers, the authority that has been given to our local authorities. These administrative functions, these are semi-autonomous agencies. They are not autonomous as we would want to that. But when you read the different government policies, you get a sense that government is actually satisfied when they use decentralization as a term. They are afraid of getting into the nitty-gritties where the citizens are saying, this is what we take, this is what you have, this is what you take, this is what you have. So the government is preferring to use decentralization, and even their national policy, it's contradictory. How do we then proceed to have a decentralization and devolution policy? I don't seem to understand the sense in this thing, and I believe that it is deliberate in order to create this opaque situation where they say they both work. Yet the other is a form, and the other is the overarching principle. So, like our parastatals, you see the government minister is the one who appoints the boards all over the place. Each minister comes with his own board members. When the Minister X comes into office, they bring their person. And even after 6 months, you are removed because you are not the favorite of the minister. That's delegated authority. Then there is federalism. I think that, you see, this is what happens in bigger jurisdictions, like where you are in America, where your states, the 50 states, are autonomous in many respects. And there is the federal government, there is federal legislation, then there is the state. They can actually make their legislation at the state level, and they are good with that. But in a smaller country like Zimbabwe, this is where they talked about secessionists, and they castigated the people of this region to say, probably, and the Manicaland. And you remember at that time, there was this talk that, Mozambique is saying Manicaland stretches to Macheke. So the Manicaland people want to go elsewhere. Then there's privatization. We have seen that the government is unable to cater for all of us, and they allow private sectors. These are just autonomous. They make their own rules for profit, but the government retains the oversight role in terms of enacting the laws and the policies. Then devolution. This is the complete area that we are looking at, to say this is the complete form of decentralization that we are looking at, where we are saying the political decision making lies and the power lies with the people. And this is where Sitman, you are talking about understanding this. This is where it matters, but this is where the conflict is. Where the people are, key decisions are made by a collective of the people, but the people are excluded in this regard. Decisions continue to be made elsewhere. So that's a challenge. So there is that continuous control of the government. So we have some constitutional provisions. I highlighted earlier that I would talk about some constitutional provisions. They have been highlighted. So I will just talk about those that were not included. There is a point that is raised in section 264, subsection 1, where they are saying, whenever appropriate, governmental powers and responsibilities must be devolved to provincial and metropolitan councils and local authorities which are competent to carry out these responsibilities efficiently and effectively. You can deduce that the national government assumes that out of the 60 rural district councils and the 32 urban local authorities, none has become competent to implement devolution. And we have a Minister of Local Government and Public Works. What is it exactly that we are trying to communicate? I hope you are following. The assumption that we give only to competent, who determines the competence level, when there is a process that is done to allocate the title, town status, local government, local board, it gets to a town status, it gets to a municipal status, it gets to a city status. There are processes. I'm sure, Dr. Chakunda, you teach about these issues, because the processes that determine at what level a local authority is determined by the government through its processes. So when they talk of competence, are we going back to this process to say maybe they are not yet competent, they don't have the capacity? What does it take for the local authorities to be competent, to be given the powers? So the appropriate mechanisms and procedures to facilitate the coordination. We have seen that there is a lot of infighting from the Prime Minister's Directive of 1984 and the follow-up Prime Minister's Directive of 1985. You saw that the government was not satisfied with the role of the provincial councils. They would get things from the ward, from the district to the province. But the role of the province has always been problematic. And I'm just wondering, what was the rationale of creating this three-tier system where we have provincial councils and metropolitan councils? The composition is the chairperson of a local authority, the members of parliament, the senators, proportional representation, and this is highlighted in chapter 14 of the Constitution under the provision of sections 269 and 270. You get that. So then there is another question. In the amendment to the Urban Councils Act in 1996, there was a provision to allow for the executive mayorship. They tested that, but by the time we had elections across the country in June 2000, we did not have any election in Harare. You recall that we had a commission. Then we had an election in Harare in March 2002, and Engineer Mudzuri came. Other executive mayors were already in office. This was not properly evaluated to be saying were the executive mayors a success or a failure. And the residents are really concerned that, you see, there is always contestation between the mayoral function and the expected functions of every councillor or the local authority. So this contestation has raised the question of why can't we go back to the executive mayors? And in 2008, we had a certain approach where we could do the approach that Dr. Moyo raised, where people like Advocate Masunda were hired, were brought in to chair council as the mayor. Then in 2013, after other amendments, we went back to the system where we are saying the councillor first gets elected in their ward. Then the councillors, when they come together, they choose on their first sitting who becomes the mayor. And the question of meritocracy comes again. Who forms our local authority to advance a devolved governance culture? We are putting forward people, some of them who were doing a lot of violence outside Harvest, and they are now councillors. They are making policies, and you expected them to really give away power. I don't know. So we have the question of tenure of seats. I have been asked to talk about the teething challenges. One of the major source of problems has been the tenure of members of local authorities. in terms of section 278, we are told that a councillor lives in office, a councillor, the mayor, or the chairperson of a committee leaves their office at the instigation of their political party. And after, probably, that is the other route through section 129. Section 129 is the one that brought a mini general election to Zimbabwe on March 26 last year. Because the political party would get angry. You anger the leader writes to the minister to say, this one no longer belongs to us. Service delivery is compromised because someone akayama for a very short time. You see, in psychology, they talk about these behaviors. When a person breastfeeds for less than the required period, they take in certain behaviors. And sometimes when you don't respect them, they get angry with you, they recall you. But this was not the first time that people were recalled. This section has been used. You remember it was initially enacted for Edgar Tekere. Edgar Tekere criticized Robert Mugabe and he became like an independent, but he was a member of parliament. But Mugabe would say, we have fired Edgar Tekere from parliament. And the next day, Edgar Tekere is in the chambers debating and raising corruption issues. And Mugabe is asking, hey, didn't we fire this boy? Why is he in parliament? Then the law says we cannot do anything about him. Then a law was put in place to avoid crossing the floor. Yeah. So that is a major challenge. Even now, as we talk, Section 129, subsection K, is the source of problems for the ratepayer in terms of recall of elected office bearers. There is a wrong assumption that a political party is acting on behalf of ratepayers. The political party is the political party acting on behalf of the ratepayers, or they are acting on their own behalf to satisfy their own political parties and agendas. That is another challenge. Then government efforts at institutionalizing devolution. I highlighted earlier that there were some contradictions in the government's policies. They released the decentralization devolution policy on 31 August 2020. That was in the middle of the COVID outbreak. Then they also released another document, Vision 2030 document, in September 2018. There are a lot of contradictions. If you access that document from clause 77 to say clause 95 of the Vision 2030 document, you don't get to understand what government really wants. Do they want to decentralize? Do they want to give powers to the communities? So this vagueness is not by accident, it's deliberate. It's not there by accident. The powers to be devolved are not clearly specified, although the intentions are outlined. That is per our vision, we want to devolve. As per our constitution, we want to devolve. But there is no clarity as to how this will happen. And this leaves it to the interpretation of the leaders. Then, when you look at the roles of provincial and metropolitan councils likely to be conflicted with the function of urban and rural local authorities, the principles for the Provincial Councils and the Administration Amendment Bill to amend the Provincial Councils and Administration Act, Chapter 29.11, the government says the issues to do with the devolution of powers to local authorities will be addressed in a separate piece of legislation. If you go to the principles on part 2.4, you will see what I'm talking about. They are saying, despite Chapter 14 providing for the establishment of provincial councils and metropolitan councils, Antika, as part of devolution, but they are not allowing this piece of legislation to really dwell on the nitty-gritties of devolved governance. And that is a major challenge. There are challenges that we have noted through our interface with the communities and interaction with the government. There is inconsistent government position on the type, form, and governmental powers to be devolved. On fiscal powers, what powers they don't want local authorities to borrow without their authority. The local authorities cannot charge certain services as they want because of the national interest and the lobbying from the residents. The residents want services and the local authorities say, we don't have the money. And there was an earlier suggestion that, government charges you tax when you import your car and get it direct. Taxes, they deduct without talking to you and you get your product. You pay before. So this is an issue that we need to also seriously interrogate. Then access to information on devolution funds disbursement remains a nightmare in most local authorities. They hide this data. You will not get it easily. Like in Harare, you are moved from one office to another office. You go to Chitungwiza, you are told that you have to go to this one. And this one says, I don't have the authority. Can you put it in writing? You put in writing. You are referred to another. Section 301, subsection 3. It has become the vehicle through which the national government directly implements what should be implemented by local authorities. But let's highlight the fight in the implementation of the emergency road rehabilitation program, phase 2. Money is transferred not to the local authorities, but it is transferred to CMED. CMED is not a part of a local authority, it's part of the national government, isn't it? And they are talking of roads, repair, maintenance, upgrade. And you have our Boshoff Road in that stretches from Seke Road past Houghton Park up to Simon Mazoro, the Mashingo Road. That road, it does not have drainage. And it was completed a few months back, but it is now heavily potholed. The companies that are given the jobs are related to vehicles of looting of public resources, in fact. So there is perpetual conflict between and among key policymakers. National government is unwilling to relinquish powers. Devolution is seen as highly contested. We are looking at local authorities as well, unprepared and unwilling. You recall that sometime back they introduced in some local jurisdictions the 10% what the retention schemes, to say 10% of the revenues collected remain in that ward. But we have not seen that. They don't even disclose how much has been raised from how many properties. Then recommendations. This is directed to policymakers, but also to civil society, to say, let's invest heavily in building a movement from the grassroots. Once we have people who speak the language we are using here, no policymaker or national bureaucrat will come and lie to them. I'm happy that we are sharing this platform with someone who was a government minister, and he succeeded in that mandate. He attended meetings called by civil society. He would come and speak. And most of the government bureaucrats and ministers, when you invite them, you must beg them. They will tell you that you can't invite this one so that I come. I don't do press briefings. They prepare and that kind of thing. So involve national government and local government bureaucrats and policymakers in all discourse on devolution and public finance management. Like in this meeting, I think that one of the key recommendations would be that when you hold the next evaluation, let's bring 1 or 2 people who represent particularly the office of the president and cabinet. They are responsible for monitoring and evaluating government programs. They could be very useful coming here, even the procurement and regulatory authority of Zimbabwe, so that they also hear the feedback about what is happening with the government programs. Then enact all pieces of legislation to give effect to the provisions of the Constitution on devolution and public finance management. Full devolution, in conclusion, full devolution will only take place when there is alignment between the rulers and the government on what constitutes national development. Ubuntu should be the guiding principle that our leaders and the citizens should collectively uphold. The government of Zimbabwe, I can assert that the government of Zimbabwe is not yet ready to implement devolution. We can say as much as we want, highlight a lot of issues, but they are not yet ready. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Probably we've got room for just 3 recommendations, comments, not questions per se, but we're going to pick them up from there. And let's kindly just try to keep them as brief as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Shumba Morambwe, you raised the issue of danda heads being at the helm of institutions. The question is, those danda heads don't simply walk into these offices. They go there as a result of processes. Would you say that some of the political party processes internally are giving the fight for devolution a true result, or are they giving this process or this call what it really deserves? Because you have what is called political party cajoling, where party members are told this is the person that we have to vote for, because that person has had a role to play in the political party for the years, donkey years, and that person unfortunately is very much unable to read, write, and understand issues. That person is supposed to read a policy document, and you expect that person to fully contribute to the fight for devolution. How do you respond to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Mine is a comment. I have been listening to all the presentations, and my conclusion is that we have got a political culture which needs to be re-examined. As long as that political culture, which is toxic, is there will be a lot of resistance to progressive views, like devolution, for instance, in its context. For instance, in Manicaland, there are some resources. People in Manicaland will want to get something from their resources. In Matabeleland, the same. And also the issues of accessibility of important information and documents, which should be addressed. So, taura ya wanechi chef, munu kana chinga electwa into office, takuto munamata. Kana kutaura chinu, tingetani androdedza ni kuti courtesy bias. Yekuti zvaanotaura zvese hatigone kumuti aiwa, kumutsiura kuti aiwa marsha ichapo. Tinenge tichingonamata zvese. So vanogumisira vamera zenzi voisa muswe. So another issue imwe iripo ndeyekuti from the independence, from before independence, painzi pasina ningi, ukangowashaisha unonzi pasi kutourayiwa chaiko. Saka kakahunu ikako hakasati kapera. We are still in that area yakudhara iyoyo. Because apana chinhu progressive chinobuda under the circumstances of fear, repression, and impunity. So I will rest my case by saying a happy slave is not easy to liberate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll probably just take one brief one, very brief one, and then we need to be heading out for lunch. If there's nothing, any takers? Okay, I've got one. Doc.
Yes, I can't agree with you more, presenter, on the fact that decisions are made centrally and the local authorities are just recipients to implement. Look at our Look East policy. You get Chinese in a village in Mahongola, just clearing the forest and mining there without the involvement of the traditional leaders or even the local authority itself. How do you explain that? It's exactly what you're talking about, that they will be having the papers, having been processed elsewhere, and they're just coming here to do whatever they want, and no one, the local leadership, knows nothing about. And those guys are there. And it's not only happening in Mahongola, but it's happening in other places in the country. So it's something terrible that we need to really address.
Okay, I think my short contribution is to do with the local authorities themselves, the weaknesses. I think they've also inherited this culture of not listening as well. You have a local authority that has a chance to actually listen to what people want, what they want their devolution funds to be used for, and then they don't do that. And how can the problem of, one of the sources of devolution funds are donations. How can we guard against donations being used to buy cars, for an example, or financing salaries? That's, I think, maybe what we want, some of those things that have to be addressed in our legislation.
Thank you very much for the contributions. I think while we are digesting on that, let's also consider going downstairs to digest. Right now, as you are leaving, I would kindly ask you to pass by and see Norma, where you were registering. She will provide you with tickets for your